Good day, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome. Happy Friday to you. It is wonderful to be here with you on this last day of this week. Darren says, it's been a busy week. Hope to catch up in the live stream. We are working on DGEM 2.0 over on the Discord. I don't think we have announced that on the general chat here, just at the partners meeting. Darren, do you want me to let everybody else know what's going on there? And what is DGEM 2.0? I don't even know what 1.0 was. I know the DGEM part is what you call the Doug Gooden. No, I guess I don't. What is it? Exegetical method? Doug Gooden exegetical method. So you'll have to explain what that is. Anyway, if you want me to share, or if you want to share with everyone here what's going on, cool. So, anything happening in the world? Are you tired of it? Are y'all tense with the Israel-Iran thing, or just kind of getting on about life, not really worrying about it because it's so far away? Did you see those memes going around? There was one great one that I saw where I think a husband was, telling his wife he's not addicted to the X platform. He just is monitoring the situation in Iran and Israel. I'm a little bit there. I'm certainly very, I do pick up my phone a little more often these days to see what's happening. So I want to talk a little bit about some of it, not the war per se. And Mike, I know you're over in Europe. I'd love to hear just a summary of what the take is among people where you're at. That'd be interesting to see. What are they saying? What's the vibe over there during all of this? Darren says, yes, Discord for members only. Doug Gooden exegetical method. We are improving on your methods. Oh, well, very good. Funny. All right. So, first of all, just kind of moving toward several things that we want to talk about today. Let's talk about good thinking. As Christians, we always need to think well. We've touched on this, several times recently, but especially when things are as chaotic and uncertain as they are right now, it is important for you and me as Christians to think with level heads, to be calm, be rational, trust the Lord, and not get caught up in the fog of war. And I'll explain more about that as we go, but this is important. I mean, we should always be like this. But people are watching you. If you have children, your children are watching you. Other Christians are watching you. Your spouse, your friends, family, everybody's watching you and listening to what you say. And you can either add to the noise and the fray, or you can stand out by having control of your mind and your mouth. And that all flows from just thinking well. So we need to think well. And one of the things that we need to do is to avoid the logical fallacies. I can't remember if we talked about this already or not. In the study of logic, there are formal fallacies where the form of the argument is illegitimate. It's invalid is the technical term. And that's worth studying and thinking through how to formulate valid arguments. And that will actually help you become a better thinker to study that. But that's not what I'm talking about. There's a lot of informal fallacies, meaning they don't have to do with the form of the argument you're making, but they are fallacies in the premises that you're putting forth. Most of the time, you could say they're sort of in the category of irrelevant to the truth claim. Now, that's all technical speak, and maybe you don't care about any of that. But informal fallacies, one of the best things I have ever done, and this was 25, 30 years ago. I studied and really pondered, and then I taught, which helped solidify for me, a course on logic, and we spent a lot of time on informal fallacies. And one you definitely need to keep in mind right now is called the post hoc fallacy. How many of you, just give me a thumbs up or a yes or no, how many of you have heard of the post hoc fallacy? The full name is post hoc ergo propter hoc, which is Latin for after the thing, therefore because of the thing. Right? Something happens and something happens after it. And the fallacy is that the first thing caused the second thing. There's also a non-causal pro-causal that is similar and so on. But the classic example of this is the rooster crows in the morning, and then the sun comes up, and someone deduces that the rooster's crowing is the cause of the sun coming up. Right? And you can imagine maybe a child recognizing a couple days in a row that the rooster crows and the sun comes up. You can think of a child reasoning that, oh, the rooster crowing must cause the sun to come up, which of course is not the case. And it is childish thinking to draw a connection there. Now, I think we've talked in other contexts, the difference between a necessary inference and a possible inference. A possible inference is where you're looking for a connection between two things and say, okay, is there a connection from this to that? It is a possible inference that the rooster causes the sun to come up. And then you should do the proper investigation to determine the best you can whether or not there is a cause-effect relationship there. It is a possible inference. It is not a necessary one. It is not necessarily true that the rooster crowing causes the sun to come up. And once you debunk that and realize, okay, it's a possible inference, but you look into it and realize, yep, there's no reason to think that, then you should dispense with that conclusion altogether. The fallacy, the reasoning fallacy, is to just assume that because one thing follows another, the first thing that happened was the cause of the second. This happens all the time. If you keep your eye on it, if you keep your eyes open, you will hear people draw these conclusions over and over and over again, very confidently. So one example of this I saw just this past week, the Congress here in the U.S. defunded USAID, right? Which is, in my opinion, a wonderful thing. I'm very happy about that. I hope that the DOGE cuts sweep through our entire government. I would love to see it. Well, one of the first ones on the chopping block was USAID. Then a day or two later or so comes this report that the DNC, the Democrat National Convention, is out of money. And I saw all kinds of people, mostly on the right, saying, look what happened. USAID is defunded, and now the DNC has lost all their money. Ergo, DNC must have been getting all of their money from USAID. Now, that is a possible inference. It may be true. And it is something I think worth pursuing. And if there is a correlation there, we as American taxpayers should be very upset that the money that we paid, the taxes that we pay, found their way to the DNC. That is a possible inference worth investigating, and I hope somebody exposes it. However, So many of these pundits were simply assuming that it's true. And they are they're presenting it as a necessary inference that the first action was the defunding of USAID. The second thing that happened was the DNC saying they don't have any money, and it's like the defunding of the USAID is the rooster crowing, and the lack of money of the DNC is the sun coming up. Now, again, it may end up being true, and it's a worthy pursuit. However, to assume those things without any evidence is simply poor thinking. And if you allow someone to convince you that one thing led to the other without proof, you're going to assume things, you're going to formulate opinions on things, and it's not a rational position, and I would say it's not a charitable position. Again, you know me, I am against the DNC. I could not vote for a Democrat. I don't think I could vote for any Democrat ever as things stand now, because I think the Democrat platform itself is evil. And so anyone who allows themselves to be a part of that platform, I don't want to vote for. So I'm anti-DNC. And that's why I say I would love for this to be exposed as true. But I'm trying to be charitable and sensible, and therefore, until it is proven, I'm going to hold it as a possible inference, but certainly not make the statement as though it's obvious that's what happened here. Now, that's a clear example from just this preceding week, but you will find it all over the place, and keep your eye on it. You should be asking your question. When somebody says this caused that, you should be asking the question immediately. Is there evidence of that? Is there any proof of that? You'll do this in your relationships, right? You do something, your spouse gets upset, you assume that you were the cause, or your action was the cause. And maybe your spouse is just upset by something else. And now you start treating him or her in a certain way because you think they are upset with you. And now that makes you upset. When all the while what you perceived as they're upset had nothing to do with what you just did. Right? We do those kind of things all the time. And sometimes it causes, by making that assumption, it causes you to do things you shouldn't do. That does make somebody else upset. So the point is, keep your eyes open. Post hoc ergo propter hoc. Before the thing, therefore because of the thing. No, after the thing. Sorry, post. After the thing, therefore because of the thing. Don't do that. Does that make sense? Whether you remember the name or whatever is not that important, but do you see the fallacy there? If you spend some time thinking, keeping your eyes open, you will see and hear that all over the place, which leads me to the next thing. We are in the fog of war. Don't trust anyone's opinion or analysis. Now, hopefully, I know I have a very, very smart, intelligent, thinking following. So I'm hopeful that none of you trust the mainstream media here in America. You don't trust CNN, MSNBC, Fox News, any of them. If they make their money on clicks and views, hopefully you recognize they are not inherently trustworthy. But if you, like me, get most of your news on X, there has been a rise of more independent journalists, which I think is wonderful. However, your default setting from anyone's report about anything should be skepticism. It's amazing how freely journalists of all types, legacy, mainstream media, and independent, how freely they draw conclusions about things they couldn't possibly know. Now, again, it's one thing to say this may be the cause. I appreciate their statements that I would put in the category of possible inferences, because if that is their pursuit, journalism is their job and their pursuit, then they are going to be pursuing things that I don't have the time or the connections to pursue. So for someone to say, here's what I've heard, and this may be the case, I like it. I value that. But so often they just make statements of great affirmation and assertion, I guess I should say. And our mindset needs to be skepticism. How could you know that? And so many people think they can read minds. They know what Israel's doing. Netanyahu, yep, they know his plan. They know the Ayatollah's plan. They know Donald Trump's plan. They know what Tulsi Gabbard is thinking. Obviously, she is upset because Donald Trump dissed her earlier in the week. No, he didn't. At least not what I've seen publicly, he didn't. But that was the immediate reporting saying he threw her under the bus. Now, what I heard him say was, I don't care what she says. I'm convinced Iran is very close to nuclear weapons. That's not throwing her under the bus. He's allowed to disagree with her. And she could come back and disagree with him. Now, she actually made the statement later that she doesn't disagree with him at all, that they're saying the same thing. But as soon as he said, I don't care what Tulsi Gabbard said, I think this, people jumped all over it to try to say he was throwing her under the bus. They are at odds. Suddenly they're reporting that she wasn't invited to the Security Council meeting without the explanation of, is it normal for her to be invited to a Security Council meeting? Is it required? Do they know for a fact that he didn't invite her? All this stuff, pure speculation. And some of it probably malicious, although I don't know. Certainly it's people just jumping to conclusions. And again, they're trying to get clicks as well. There's a money component to all of it, right? Whether it's the legacy media that gets their money through advertising, or it's through X and other social media where the more eyeballs and interaction with engagement, it's called, they get with their posts, then that's how they make their money. Just don't trust anybody at small level or big level media. And step back with a careful eye to see how many assumptions are in their assertions. Learn to ask the question, how could they know that? You know, sources say, White House officials say. That right there for me, any statement like that is automatic. I'm not going to believe a word you say. If you say sources say, White House officials say, I'm not believing a word of it. If you can't say a specific, individual, Tulsi Gabbard said, J.D. Vance said, or whatever, and even there, the media has misquoted, sometimes on purpose, most of the time I would say on purpose, editing out certain things, just give, the magic of editing. You know how you can make anybody say anything just by selective editing? We just have to be so careful because we get worked up over this. And later, when we join in repeating the assertions that are proven false later, we look like fools because we weren't thinking carefully. Yeah, Mike says he doesn't trust the mainstream media in Europe either. Yeah, because they're all cut from the same cloth, right? None of it is trustworthy. And this is not new, by the way. This is not new. this goes back, at least to the time of the Civil War and before that, back to the Revolutionary War, probably forever, right? Media just can't be trusted. Christian says narrative deliverers, yep, and they all, then they have different narratives, right? Darren says, and bad theology drives foreign policy. Isn't that the truth? Yeah. Did you see the Ted Cruz, Tucker Carlson? Someone sent me an email saying that they'd like to see me engage with either of those guys on Israel. Aaron says, none of them has sufficient information to have a concrete assessment of complex situation like Iran. Everyone has primary filters through which they view. Exactly. And it seems like so many Christians act like that is not true. We get swept up in the narratives and we get worked up. And here's what we tend to do. And I see this in close friends, whether it's in personal conversations or online. We pick certain pundits and we place our trust in them. This happens so much with all the Trump stuff. I've seen some good friends who will give allegiance to certain pundits and take their view of Trump or this situation or that situation. And my question is, why have you decided to trust that person? And even if you generally give them the benefit of the doubt, you shouldn't just take it on their word. Think it through and just be careful, be open, especially so far removed. Yeah, so I agree with you, Aaron. That's well put. And we have to really hold that. Sana says presuppositions even outside of Scripture. Indeed. Edgar says, I only trust Rabbi Doug. Yeah, don't give uncritical trust to me either. Yeah, I know you're just joking, but another thing to keep in mind, all sides are using deception. And here I'm talking about our political leaders. They all are intentionally deceiving everybody. That's what happens in warfare. Now, there's a difference between lying and wartime deception. In some cases, they are very much the same, right? Well, the point is, when we hear things from Netanyahu, when we hear things from Khomeini, hear things from Trump, realize they have a strategic purpose in deception. And of course, Trump is the great exaggerator, right? So I think he is directionally true most of the time. I don't think he just stands up and lies to the American people in order to mislead us, but he's fighting the battle, and so much of the battle, especially from America's perspective, where we're not actually engaged in warfare yet, winning the narrative, winning the battle of perception is so important, and Trump is a master at that. But Netanyahu's also very good, and Khomeini's pretty good. So the point is, they're all deceiving. Like the initial reports that I think, was it something like Mossad had, or at least Israel in some form had been creating, was it missile launching capability or drone launching capability inside of Iran? And that initial attack, there was all this stuff going on, and they just keep saying, how they've infiltrated this and that, and they've got they had a spy way deep in Khomeini's inner circle kind of thing. How could we? Maybe that's true, but it also could be part of the plan to try to just so devastate and what's the word I'm looking for? Mentally defeat Iran, thinking, oh no, Israel may have their spies everywhere here and have Khomeini not be able to sleep at night because any one of these guys could be actually on Israel's side and so on. That's just how warfare works. And it goes the other way as well. And, you hear these statements. What was the statement that Iran made a few nights? I shouldn't be laughing. I mean, this is war, but there's an element that's amusing. And trust me, I said this the other day, right? We must keep in mind there are real people dying, real people's lives being completely devastated, and it probably will get worse. So I don't mean to make a little light of it. When Khomeini says, tonight something is going to happen that they'll be talking about for centuries, and then there's nothing, right? This is how it goes. And Trump, we can't. I don't distrust Donald Trump as our president. But I also am not trusting everything he says to be 100% accurate because he's fighting a war. Right now, for us, it's a war of words, not a war of weapons. But just realize he's got a purpose in what he says and doesn't say to us and to the media and so on. And that's just how it works. So at the end of all of this, if he misled everyone in serious ways, that's not going to be offensive to me because that's what leaders do in wartime. And we have to keep that in mind as we listen to all this. Aaron says, TDS sufferers don't understand the art of the deal. Point, deflect, and assess with social media posts. Yeah, exactly. I mean, he's been doing this for so long in so many different arenas. And those who are just against Trump no matter what, yeah, they're going to use anything later that's exposed as inaccurate as, see, he's a liar, can't be trusted, and so on. But they didn't need any more fuel for that. All right, so that leads me to the final kind of area I wanted to touch on here. And I think it's important as Christians and Americans and anyone who lives in a representative government to take a step back here and think this through. So in the U.S., we are in a republic, not a democracy. And that is very important. Very, very important. Historically, democracies have been disastrous, which our founding fathers knew very well. They studied deeply and carefully about it, and that's why they did not create a democracy for the U.S. We are a republic, meaning we are represented by those whom we elect to hold governmental positions. Elections matter, right? The people we have put in office at the federal level, at the state and local level, it matters. And we have talked about, and we'll probably talk about again, just what has happened in the U.S. With the illegitimate elections, the fraud, all that's happening. It's a mess. And that if we don't fix that, then that will be the end of the U.S., I think. But setting that aside for now, what I want us to think about is with real-time communication and real-time information and social media, everything is pushing toward a democracy. I mean, it's been an old joke that's not entirely just facetious. Talk about politicians voting, they put their finger up and see whichever way the wind's blowing and vote accordingly. That has never been easier and faster, right? It wasn't too many years ago that they would have to do some sort of polling and take days and weeks to gather and assimilate the response and then see what the majority report is, that kind of thing. Now it's instantaneous almost. We do not want our politicians making decision based on polling. And I hear even conservative thinkers like Matt Walsh, and I could be pulling this way out of context. I know this happens, whether or not I'm speaking truly of him or not. But what I thought happened was there was some talk about the government selling off some federal land, and Matt Walsh said, we need to make our voice heard. Maybe it was maybe I'm confusing. It was the war. It seemed like Trump was very close to dropping the bunker busters, and then there was a big outcry from some of MAGA, don't do it, and then his wording and tone changed a little bit, and Walsh said something like, this is important, we need to make our voice heard, and so on. I may be conflating all the stories, but you know that happened, right? Those are the kinds of things that happen. If we get to a point where our elected officials are making decisions based on the outcry of people, I think we are in a dangerous situation. Do you see the danger? So let's just paint that scenario. So let's say Trump truly is thinking about sending in the B-2s, are going to drop the bunker busters, take out the nuclear capability of Iran. He's thinking that is the wise decision. And then on X and all social media, all the media, there's just this huge outcry of MAGA right-wing people saying, if you do this, you're betraying MAGA and you're going back on your word, yada, yada, yada. And Trump decides, okay, I don't want to upset all those people, so I will refrain. Do you see the danger in that situation? Mike says the EU is also not a democracy. Sana says Switzerland is mostly democratic, I think. Interesting. Aaron says Lindsey Graham's X feed is a masterclass in catering to whichever the way. Yeah, it seems like that is true so long as the wind is blowing toward more war, right? That seems to be. Although he does at times make contrary statements. What's the danger of a situation like I just described with Trump and the MAGA movement and the right? Do you see it? The danger is the same with any democracy. If the outcry is from the other side, right? If you're going to make your decision as a leader based on how many people are for it or against it, you're not leading and you're not doing what you were elected to do. Darren says he was elected on an anti-war platform. In this case, the people that elected him are holding him to that. I'm going to disagree with you there. We'll come back and talk about that in a moment. Yeah, Sana got it. Whoever screams the loudest sways the president. Yeah, we are a representative government. We vote people into decision-making positions to make decisions on our behalf. They represent us. And we have to trust them to make wise decisions. And the recourse we have is to vote them out of office. Now, I recognize well, let me say it this way. I'm not naive to all the corruption and the manipulation of the system there is. I get that. And part of the dilemma in my own mind with what's going on is the Constitution says Congress must declare war. The president cannot do that. The Congress has delegated certain powers to the president. Where those lines are seem to be debated and fuzzy. And we've got a Congress, frankly, that I don't trust. Yet the Constitution says that, yet we've allowed the president to take other warlike actions, and it's complex. So I'm not naive to any of that. But I guess the point here is I voted for Donald Trump not only because he's anti-war, but because I think he's wise in these situations. The actions that he has taken, I think, are wise and right. In the past, in his first term, for instance, he has access to information I can't possibly have access to, and neither can you. So at least from my perspective, and obviously you're free to disagree with me, I'm just saying we elected him. I voted for him because I'm convinced he has the right perspective on these things, on foreign policy. And he has access to more information than anybody. If he decides to attempt to take out the nuclear facilities in Iran, unless information later comes out that shows that he, truly went against principles, I'm going to say it's the right move. At least, I'm going to trust him until I have good reason not to. And his previous statements about being against war, in my opinion, are not in direct conflict with the goal of taking out the nuclear capability of Iran. Now, I appreciate the argument that says, then what? Now we're drawn in. Now we are in a war and so on. But he has been saying this for many, many, many years, decades, that Iran can't have nuclear capabilities. And if he decides that is the best thing for everyone, he's earned my trust in making that decision, and he has all the information. I don't have any of the information. Neither do you. So again, whether I persuade you or not, that's not the point. I just think as Christians, we have to think very carefully and not join the fray of getting wound up and yelling at those who have a different perspective. If Darren does disagree with what I just said, cool, that's fine. We could talk about that if it was, if we wanted to take the time to do that and argue our position and so on. But just don't let it work you up. Right? Just don't get caught up in the heat of it. Think and recognize the decision makers have far more information than the rest of us. All right, I'll stop there. Eddie says, do you see democratic forms of church governance as problematic or just unbiblical or just unwise? That's a bigger question, a different question. To put it succinctly, we do see examples in the scripture of the church having a say, like take it to the church, right? In Matthew 18, the whole group. And when Paul writes to the Corinthians, he's addressing the entire body of believers there and says, get that guy sleeping with his father's wife out of there. He doesn't say that to the elders. He says to the church, you all should have run him out of there already. And yet we know that elders have legitimate authority. I don't think that any one elder should. So I see a little more. It's both and, it seems to me, and working that out requires some thought and wisdom. Amy says, decisions shouldn't be dictated by the mob. A person is smart, people are dumb, panicky, dangerous animals. Yeah. It might be Men in Black? Sana says, do we really even have to agree with every decision a leader makes? I don't think it works that way. No, of course not. Of course not. I'm just saying in this scenario, I don't agree with every decision Trump makes, or I don't feel obligated to. No. In a scenario like this, where he has all the information and in my perspective has proven himself trustworthy in making these kind of decisions, I'm going to defer to him until given clear reasons why I shouldn't. No, we don't have to agree with everybody's decision about everything. I mean, you don't have to agree with every decision your husband makes, but got to watch your attitude when you disagree, right? Louis says, agree. This is complex and definitely not a black and white situation. Yeah, be humble and don't lose friends over this. It's not worth it. It's just not worth it. It's uncharitable. You can disagree with me vehemently here. I'm not going to love you any less or care for you any less. I would appreciate if you don't attack me personally. Poke holes in my arguments all you want, right? But don't act like I'm the enemy because of what I've said. And I will try to give you the benefit of that and not act like you are an enemy if you have a different understanding and thinking through this. And politics always does this, but especially now with the heat of all this and people just so easily follow what they see online, just don't let this become something that causes division, and be willing to consider that you're wrong. I could be wrong about this, and maybe somebody will give me an argument and say, no, because of this is not true. And all right, I need to give that consideration, and let's not make the enemy each other. And he says maybe nuanced consensus would describe how we should make decisions in the church rather than raw democracy. Of course, that would be impossible on the scale, of national politics. Church is certainly not a raw democracy. Elders do have authority, but I would say in most church traditions, too much authority beyond what the Bible gives, is assumed for the pastor and elders, even by making that distinction. The most authority is given to the pastor, which is not a biblical stance. But it's not a democracy either. So Aaron says, if friendships can survive COVID, this seems unlikely to undermine that relationship. You would think that, right? But Israel is kind of getting what Darren said. People will make you an enemy. Even friends will make you an enemy if you're not pro-Israel as far as they think you should be, and so on. So, I would think that, but we can find reasons for division out of just about anything. All right, folks, we'll leave it there. Have a great weekend. We'll come back on Monday and pick up 2 Thessalonians. Grace and peace to you.